Likely Suspects, May 30th, 1936. I lay in bed the next morning feeling mightily burdened. Something had been gnawing at me all night. It was Gideon. Where did he fit into all this? How was he connected to this town, to these people? Manifest was the place he had chosen to send me, and yet it didn't seem like he'd even been there. Did he know Ned or Jinx? Did anyone know him? I wasn't even sure that I did. Now there was a thought. What did I know about Gideon? What did I think people should know about him? I started a list in my head. He always walked like he knew where he was going. He was a better cook than Shady. He tucked the blanket up under my chin when he thought I was asleep. I stretched out in the warmth of my bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin. Let's see, I thought. He was smart, not so much book smart, even though he did know all 48 states and capitals and all the presidents from Washington to Roosevelt. No, Gideon was more living by your wits smart. He had once turned a bunch of wildflowers into a $20 bill. Some might have said that wasn't smart, that was magic, not the way Gideon had done it. He'd gathered up a nice bunch of wildflowers and traded them for a sewing kit in Decatur. Then in Fort Wayne swapped that for a camera, which he raffled off at a church picnic in South Bend. Chances were 25 cents apiece or 5 for $1. He ended up with $7.50 and bought us a tandem bicycle. But our behinds were sore by Kalamazoo, so he sold it for a $20 bill to a man with twin grandkids. I remembered all these things about Gideon, but I couldn't remember if he'd said the words or if I'd only imagined them. Those words, "I'm coming back for you." Memories were like sunshine. They warmed you up and left a pleasant glow, but you couldn't hold on to them. I'd have to do some divining of my own, I thought, as I rolled over. There was the Wiggly King fishing lure sitting on the windowsill where I'd left it the night before. I should have put it back in the cigar box, but somehow it had separated itself from the rest of the items. It had become different, special, and it needed a special place. There was a welcome breeze blowing through the open window. I was no stranger to hard work, but the thought of being cooped up in Miss Sadie's divining parlor left me feeling a bit short of breath. Maybe I could busy myself helping Shady and wouldn't have to go. There was a plan. I'd saunter downstairs and make myself so useful Shady couldn't possibly see fit to allow me to walk out the door, let alone do someone else's bidding. I figured that Shady might be feeling a little down in the mouth that day. He'd held his church service the night before, followed by a potluck. It turned out to be more of a down on your luck, as only one person showed up. A fellow with a week-old beard and a hole in his hat bought a can of beans. I hopped out of bed, put on my overalls, and headed down the narrow wooden stairs. "Good morning, Shady," I said, ready to sit down to a plate of his usual warm, slightly burnt biscuits and molasses. Shady stashed something under the bar and mumbled words I didn't catch. When he looked up, I could see that his eyes were kind of bloodshot, and his whiskers hadn't been shaved since the day before. The bottle on the shelf behind the bar was still full, but I supposed it was like any craven. If a person liked cookies, he was going to keep more than one at hand. When Shady went back to the stove for my breakfast, I leaned across the counter and peered behind it. But there was only a chipped coffee cup holding a couple of nickels and a button. Was it Shady's drink money? Alcohol was against the law then as much as it was in 1917, but folks could usually get a bottle of the stuff here or there. I didn't know if bootleggers would take buttons for payment along with the nickels. I scooted back to my bar stool as Shady came in, presenting me with a plate of cold, more than slightly burnt biscuits and a half-leathery pork chop. I knew that times were hard, so I didn't complain, but my stomach couldn't help its moaning and groaning. Hattie Mae had bought some delicious fried chicken the day before, but that was a distant memory. I bit into a hard biscuit, hoping I had enough spit to soften it up. But just then Shady brought me a cold glass of milk. I nearly drank it down in one gulp, and he poured me another one. It filled my stomach nicely, but in my head I made plans to go by the newspaper office later to see if Mattie May had any leftovers. I thought maybe you could use some help around here, I said to Shady, wiping off my milk mustache. I do laundry and mending, and I'm even good with a hammer and nail. He scratched his whiskery face, making an awful sound like sandpaper on rough wood. Well, that's awful nice of you to offer, but I'm feeling a little spent this morning and need a bit of a lie down. Besides, Miss Sadie will be expecting you, he said. I choked a little on the biscuit brick, wondering how much Shady knew of my ill-conceived agreement with the diviner, when he went over to a box in the corner of the room and pulled out a wire bristle brush, one glove, a half-full bag of chewing tobacco, and a cracked mirror. Then his eyes lit up and he said, "There you are." He pulled out a long coil of rope and proceeded to tie a large knot at each end. He gave the rope a good tug, testing its worth, and presented it to me. "Every little girl needs a skipping rope," he said with a smile as he replaced the odds and ends and hauled the junk back out. I held the rope in my hands and felt a stinging in my eyes. I didn't really think of myself as a little girl anymore, but I smiled. "I had a skipping rope once," I said when he returned. "It was in Tennessee, and I was using it to pull a wagon full of firewood. I guess I'd loaded too much wood in it because the rope broke in two. I've always wished I could do that over. I wouldn't have carried such a heavy load." "Seems to me you've been carrying a heavy load for some time." Shady's eyes looked deep, like deep, watery pools. "Besides, everyone deserves a do-over. Now you've got yours," he smiled. I smiled back, feeling the rough, bristly rope. It was like Shady. He had his rough edges, but he was strong and steady. I guess I'd better fess up about the diviner, since that cat was out of the bag anyway. About last night. I lost my compass again the other day, and I had to go see about getting it back. Miss Sadie told me. I take a little milk over to her on my way back from town a couple of times a week." "Did you have a nice visit?" "If you mean did she tell my fortune, no, she did not. She just carried on a bit, jingling and jangling, telling me an old story about a couple of boys who lived here a long time ago. I kind of liked having the letters and mementos mostly to myself, so I decided to keep those a secret. But I broke her pot, and now I have to go back to work it off." Shady perked up a bit. "She told you about a couple of boys?" "Yeah, and some trouble they got into with the clan, with some poison ivy and such. Ned and Jinx, did you know them?" Shady occupied himself by scrubbing down the bar top. "I did." That gnawing feeling came back to me, and I worked up my nerve. "Shady?" "Yes, Eveline?" "Do you think Gideon knew those two boys? Did he have many friends when he was here? Did he ever go fishing with anyone or swimming in the creek?" My questions and my need to know came out in a rush. "Well now," Shady rubbed the back of his neck. "Let me see. I'm sure your daddy did most things boys do. Swim, fish, cause havoc." He worked at a stubborn spot on the counter, but I caught him catching a glimpse of me. "Didn't he tell you much about when he was here?" "Yes, he told me lots of things. He said there was a man who drove a cart around town and brought fresh milk to people's doorsteps, and ladies who'd walk down the street in white gloves and fancy hats with big feathers sticking way up. But it's like he was telling things you'd noticed from the treehouse. Storefronts and activity. People going here and there, but only what you could see from a distance. Nothing up close. Why, I only heard about you a few weeks ago. Did he write to you at all?" Shady paused, and his shoulders looked heavy. "A postcard now and then." Sometimes when folks move on, it's hard to look back. It's not their fault. He knew he wondered a bit after he left here. But then we all got word that he had a little girl, and we knew he'd take good care of you. I did warm a little at that, but I wasn't ready to be done grumbling. I stuck my chin on my fist. Well, Gideon's telling a manifest was nothing like Miss Sadie's. Her story was full of names and faces, and who did what where. I learned more about manifest in one sitting with her than from all of Gideon's stories put together, I grumbled. But I still hadn't learned anything about Gideon. Shady looked up, and with the sun gleaming in through the stained glass, he looked like he was having a revelation. Yes, that Miss Sadie sure can weave a story. I bet she could fill in some of the missing pieces. I don't know if Shady would have said more, but he looked relieved to hear a little jingle at the door. Letty and Ruth Ann poked their heads in. Hey, Abilene. Then, remembering their manners, they added, Good morning, Shady. Good morning, he answered. Would you girls care for a glass of buttermilk? Yes, please, Letty and Ruth Ann answered together. Shady went into the back room and Letty whispered, First we have to sell some eggs in town. Then we can work on the Rattler mystery. We've made a list of suspects. Mr. Cooper the barber, Mr. Coxey at the diner, Hattie May. Hattie May, I whispered back. The nice newspaper lady? Surely you don't think she's the Rattler. Well, not really, but she's got a sweet tooth, and she'll probably give us a licorice whip or some jelly beans if we stop by. But we'll start with Mr. DeVore, the postmaster. Mention of Hattie May made me think of something. Wait a minute. I need to run back upstairs. I went up and thumbed through the newspapers I'd selected from Hattie May's office. I found her column in both and gave each a quick look-see. It was the one from October 11 that rang a bell. I carefully tore it out and made a point to take another to look through Hattie May's old newspapers later. As I went back downstairs, Shady was pouring the buttermilk. What are you girls up to today? We're doing some corporal works of mercy. Mr. DeVore needs visiting. Oh, does he? Is he sick? Sick? Ruth Ann pondered the question. I guess you could say that if you consider loneliness a sickness. Who wouldn't be? Spending all day sorting everyone else's letters, from dear ones far and near, and never having a loving word sent your way? Shady looked like he had been given more answer than he had asked for. Well, you be sure and give him my regards. Tell him we missed him at last night's service, and we'd be pleased to have him come back next week at the same time. He reached behind the bar, where he'd stashed something earlier, and took out that something wrapped in a brown paper bag. Good day, girls, he said as he left. There was an awkward silence as I thought about what might be in that bag. Then Ruth Ann said, Come on, Abilene, finish up and let's go. Can't, I said before washing down the last of my biscuit. Why not? Asked Letty. I handed her the October 11 Hattie May News Auxiliary. The paper was a little wet from my sweaty hand. I got a debt to work off.